My first night in a rolling anchorage, I learned the value of a piece of galley equipment I had never used before. And if you want to say stave, you'll learn how to use pot restraints to keep your hot pans in place safely. Hi there, I'm Carolyn Sherlock, and in this episode of the Boat Galley podcast, I'll share what every cruiser needs to know about galley stove pot restraints. First, though, let's have a little word from our sponsor. Today's episode of the Boat Galley podcast is sponsored by Lunatech, makers of the hydration spray bottle, an odor-free dishcloth, and a self-cleaning washcloth. Lunatech offers practical gear designed to save water and reduce waste. A water bottle that doubles as a sprayer, giving you pressure water to rinse your dishes. A dishcloth that doesn't get stinky. Oh, yes, please. I love them both. Visit lunatechgear.com to learn more and use code BOATGALLEY to save 10% on everything. Lunatech, innovative gear for your outdoor adventures. Okay, let's talk about the pot restraints. I have to go back to our first night on our first cruising boat. There we were. First night out of the marina with our new-to-us boat. We were so excited. I had planned a special dinner, including a rice salad. Little did I know that we had picked one of the rolliest anchorages we'd be in any time over the next 17 years of cruising. But I did quickly learn the value of pot restraints. Actually, when I had initially explored what the previous owners had left in the galley, I'd come across these funny little metal arms with screws on one end. It had finally dawned on me that they fit on the stove to hold pans in place. In previous charters and so forth, before we'd bought our own boat, I'd used the stove gimbal, but I'd never really needed pot restraints, never even tried them. Well, that first night at anchor on Cape Tall, as I put the pan of rice on the burner and watched it slide across to the other burner, it hit me that I better dig those pot restraints out quickly. From then on, I never took them off until the day we prettied up the boat in preparation for selling her. Now, virtually any stove designed for use in a boat comes, at least originally, with pot restraints, also known as pot holders, pan holders, or pot and pan clamps. They are the first half of the equation for keeping your cooking on the stove and not on the floor, or worse, spilling food on the cook. Now, the other half is the stove gimbals. I've talked about them separately. But anyways, pot restraints are generally little metal bars that screw into each side of the stove and hug a pan on a burner. You loosen the knob a little to swing the bars into the correct position, then tighten the knob back down so the pot doesn't slide with the motion of the boat. Other brands have different mechanisms, but that's the most common. These aren't just for use underway. They're also great in rolling anchorages or those with lots of passing traffic. And I've even needed them in marinas a few times when there was a good norther blowing and we were heeled over right at the dock. Now, unless you spend almost all your time at a very sheltered marina, I highly recommend just leaving your pot restraints in place and using them all the time if you have a monohull. If you always use them, you won't forget when the conditions are marginal. And you never know when a fishing boat or a jet ski is going to go roaring past you, even in a glassy, calm anchorage. Okay, our second boat was a catamaran, but I still used my pot restraints periodically, both underway and in rolling anchorages. Generally refrain from saying that you really need a particular item, but pot restraints are an exception. They are truly a safety item. Without them, every pan on the stove is a potential major burn on the cook if it slides while hot. Boiling water or hot oil can be spilled right down the front of anyone in the galley. Now, unfortunately, pot restraints can be hard to find and expensive. $40, $50, $60 isn't unusual if the ones that originally came with the stove have been lost. However, that cost is slight compared to the pain and the healing time, not to mention the doctor bills literally being more expensive, of spilling a pot of boiling pasta down your legs. The best place for finding pot restraints are boater swap meets, boating consignment shops, and places that pull parts from wrecked and abandoned boats. Depending on the brand, you may also find new ones by Googling something like brand potholder or boat potholder. If you use just potholder or pot restraint, it gets way too many of the wrong things. You need to include that brand information there or the fact that it's for a boat. You can also check with the manufacturer of your stove if it's relatively new. One thing to note, the restraints that came with my stove, a Force 10, were always fine for the cruising that we did. However, I have heard reports of pans flying out of the typical types of restraints when a boat, hard on the wind, basically fell off a wave. Not so much a rolling action, but a sudden drop and stop. Or when the back of a stove swinging on the gimbals hit the side of the boat hard. If you expect to encounter such conditions and think that you would actually be trying to cook on the stove in them, you may want to engineer more sturdy pot restraints specific to your boat. For that, you're probably going to have to find a metal shop and tell them what you want, give them some sketches, that kind of thing. Additionally, if conditions are rough, it pays to use deep pans that are filled less than half full so that the food can't slosh out. At times like that, I like to use my pressure cooker without putting the pressure weights on, simply because I can lock the lid in place and have even more protection against spills and burns. Even if the pan falls to the floor, the hot food inside doesn't spill. You still have a hot pan rolling around that you need to corral, which is a problem, but at least you don't have food going anywhere. If you've never been on a rolling anchorage or on a passage where it's blowing over 10, you may never have had a need for pot restraints. But it's just like having non-skid on your plates, putting drinks in drink holders. Pot restraints really are a necessity when cruising. Okay, that's it for this episode of the Boat Galley podcast. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Please, we try hard to make boat life better. So let your friends know about us and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.